I'm going to show you how to make my 2-in-1 mac and cheese. Mac and cheese made 2 ways in one. It first went viral on TikTok, had millions of views, and now I'm going to show you step by step just how to make it. Let's get started. First, I'm going to shred my cheeses for the cheese sauce. I've got some Colby Jack, and I'm going to use 4 ounces of that, and the rest of it I'm going to use later. And I've also got some smoked Gouda, and I'm going to use 4 ounces of that as well. Now, usually I use regular Gouda, but this time I'm going to use smoked Gouda, and you can use whatever cheeses you like, but I think the key is to make sure that you're using softer cheeses versus harder cheeses, because harder cheeses just don't melt down as well. I like to experiment with different types of cheeses. A lot of times I'll use Gruyere, which is another soft cheese, or I'll use Fontina. Both of those melt really well. And like a lot of other people, I grew up only using just one kind of cheese. I didn't use multiple cheeses. And the mac and cheese that my mom made was great. And I think a lot of people had that same experience, that mac and cheese was great with just one cheese. So if you only want to use one cheese, just use one. I know for a lot of people, this is controversial, using pre-shredded cheese. To me, it's not that big of a deal, but people will say that the added potato starch on there, which helps to keep the cheese from clumping up, causes the cheese to not melt as well. But I saw some studies on this, like actual scientific studies, that show that it was not that big of a deal, that people really couldn't tell whether the cheese melted better with or without the potato starch. And I don't notice a difference either. It melts just fine to me. Now I'm going to make the cheese sauce. This cheese sauce is going to be the first way that we're going to make the 2-in-1 mac and cheese. So in a saucepan, I've got 2 tablespoons of butter that I'm melting down over medium heat. Then I'm going to add 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. But basically, all that it is equal parts butter and flour. So I'm going to make a roux, and this is going to be the base of the cheese sauce. And this is how a lot of people are making their mac and cheese now. They're using a cheese sauce, and they're using a roux to do that. I'm going to cook this down for about a minute to help get rid of that raw flour taste. And I want to make sure that it is still blonde and doesn't darken up. So I'm not going to cook it too long, because the lighter it is, the more ability it has to thicken, and which is the whole point of doing this. To the roux, I'm going to add 2 cups of whole milk. I'm not using skim milk, not using almond milk, none of those other milks. You want to make sure that you are using whole milk. I'm whisking it to make sure that everything gets combined and there aren't any clumps in there. So now I'm going to add some seasoning to that. And the seasoning I'm going to use is 1.5 teaspoons of salt, 1.5 teaspoons of black pepper, and a half teaspoon of garlic powder. And I'm just going to cook this over medium heat for about 10 minutes. And I'm just going to let it thicken a little bit. I don't want it to thicken a lot. I don't want it to become like pudding. And while that's thickening, I'm going to get started on my macaroni. So I'm going to boil some macaroni in some water that's got some salt and a little oil in it. And that oil is going to help to keep the macaroni from sticking together. A lot of pros will say, don't add oil to pasta water, because it's going to keep the sauce from being able to adhere to the pasta. But not once ever in my life have I seen sauce slide off of pasta. Never. I've always seen it be able to be coated whether oil is added or not. So I think I'm good adding oil to the pasta water. I've done it every time and I've had no issues. So I've added my cheese to the bechamel, which the sauce was pretty thin, but that's where I wanted it to be, because I've got a decent amount of cheese and that's going to thicken it. And also, as it sits a little longer or goes into the oven, it's going to become thicker. And so I wanted to get to a point with the cheese sauce where it's in the mid-range of being thick and thin, kind of like this. Drain the noodles, and we're going to go on to the next step where we're going to do the 2-in-1. In this step, I'm going to be making the base for the custard. A lot of mac and cheese recipes are either custard based, they've got eggs and milk, or they're cheese sauce based. And so what I wanted to do was combine the most popular types into one recipe, and that's what I'm doing here. Which type of mac and cheese you prefer is usually going to be based on where you live. So there's a lot of people that don't even know about the custard style. I saw that in the TikTok comments. They were really shocked to see that there was even a custard style. And then there was other people like, how could you not have ever heard of this before? Now, as for me, I grew up having mac and cheese with a custard. So that was more normal for me than having one with the cheese sauce. What you see me doing now is pouring everything into a measuring cup, because That's just going to make everything a little easier for me. So I've got the eggs and the milk, and I'm also pouring my seasoning in here, which is going to be 1.5 teaspoons of salt, 1.5 teaspoons of black pepper, and 1/2 teaspoon of garlic. I'm making sure that I've got this mixed up pretty good so that everything is well combined. And I'm going to give it another mix right before I pour it over my mac and cheese. I've got a bowl that I'm going to put half of the macaroni mixture into, and I'm going to use the other half to layer in my 9x13. I'm going to grab the cheese sauce that I made and put it into this bowl with this macaroni. And I'm going to combine the two, and that's going to be the one way in the 2-in-1. I'll make sure I get everything in there. I don't want to miss any of that cheese sauce. I'm just going to give them a good mix, and just so you know, if it sits, it'll get a little thick, which isn't a problem though, because it's going to thicken up in the oven anyway. Now I'm going to set that aside and get my 9x13 out so that I can get to layering. And I'm going to layer kind of like I do a lasagna, and this is going to be the other half of the 2-in-1. The cheeses that I'm using for this step are the same that I use for the cheese sauce, except there are different measurements. I'm using 16 ounces of sharp cheddar, 8 ounces of mozzarella, 8 ounces of Gouda, and 8 ounces of Colby Jack. After I've got my first layer of cheese, I'm going to then top that off with the mac and cheese that I made with the cheese sauce. That goes on top of that. And I'm just going to make sure that I get every area that I can get, just to make sure that I'm covering each area well enough. But I want to make sure that I save enough for the top layer. After I add my first layer of mac, then cheese, then mac and cheese and the Mornay sauce, then I add the milk and egg mixture for the custard. And then I just realized that I made a mistake earlier. I added too much milk and egg. It should have been 2 cups of milk and 2 eggs. But I'm going to go ahead and roll with it anyway, because I want to see what the end result looks like. I don't think it's going to be that much different. I feel like that's a mistake that I can just keep rolling with instead of just stopping, because I could just stop right now at the 2 cups and not add in that last cup. I could do that, but I think that I want to see how it's going to go, because I think it's going to be just as good. I don't think that the difference is going to be that great. But what I will say though is I don't know that there's enough room in this 9x13, and I think that I'm going to have to end up putting a pan underneath it to catch whatever ends up dripping out. I think that's what I'm going to end up having to do. Let's see, as I pour this, I'm going to see if it looks like it's going to be too much. Yeah, this is going to be too much. But like I said, I'm rolling with it. I want to see how the end result turns out. Now while I'm prepping this, I've got my oven preheated to 350 degrees. And I'm going to top this off with the rest of the cheese. Now if you got any extra cheese left over, this is where you want to put it. You want to put it right on the top. Now you see me patting the cheese around. I'm trying to make sure that every area of this 9x13 gets covered with cheese. I want to make sure that there's no macaroni or anything else that isn't covered. I want to make sure that it's all completely covered. So I've got it in the oven at 350, and this is what it looks like when it's done. Now a lot of people may like theirs a little more broiled at the top. I like mine in between, kind of like this. I want to make sure that I'm able to get into the cheese and that the cheese isn't completely hard on the top. Now watch how this comes out. It is super creamy, cheesy, and it's absolutely delicious. Now you can see why I took the 2 most popular ways of making mac and cheese and combined them into one. I think it's absolutely amazing, and I think you will too.